How we doing, everybody? It's your guy Wardy here, and we're back at it this time with our second video on the day, and we got another one coming later on tonight as we're gonna have our post-game live stream breaking down the Mets either winning or losing in game one of a three-game set against the Halos. And we did also come out with a video that dropped a couple hours ago, this AM at the time of recording this video, as we got into the Mets certainly active in the trade market for relievers, and they're gonna be making a trade soon. So we broke down key guys in Griffin Jacks, as well as Mr. Duran, and to a degree Emmanuel Clase, that we're gonna continue to have that discussion today, everybody. As you guys see on the thumbnail, why you clicked on this video has everything to do with Jeff Passan of ESPN coming out with his latest top 50 trade target rankings and ultimately where we could see these players land. And not only does he have the Mets connected to numerous players on this list, but we're going to expand as to who those players are, which ones make more sense via trade versus others, which ones could we actually see coming to fruition, and why, along with some of the other players that we already broke down in previous content earlier today and the past coming days. You will see some repetition here for sure, but it's for a great reason. The Mets are going to be connected to these players. You just have to wonder, who are they going to land in the end? So that's what we're going to break down this one. Everything you need to know about these players here, the likelihood, unlikelihood of them being traded to the Mets, which ones make most sense versus others, and a whole lot in between. So thank you guys kindly for hitting that like and subscribe button on your way in. Let me know all your initial reactions in the comments down below to the following topics that we're about to get into. But as always, shout out to our amazing sponsors at SeatGeek that have you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Head over to SeatGeek and utilize our promo code WARDY10, link down below in the description. That way you too get 10% off your next ticket purchase. And thank you guys so much for doing exactly that, as well as hearing from our amazing sponsors briefly at BetUS that have you covered for all of your sports betting needs or casino needs. Just make sure you guys do it responsibly by heading over to betus.com.pa today and utilizing our promo code YouTube150. That is YouTube150. That way you too get a 150% bonus on your first deposit. And as you guys can see here, Cade Smith to have himself 5+ strikeouts and the Mets to win is at minus 107 odds, and I love that play. As long as the Mets bats show up, I certainly believe and hope at least that Cade Smith will do his job later on this evening. So I love this as an easy hammer, whether it's for the money line, a nice little play like this with Senga K prop, as well as the money line or over unders, you name it. I love what BetUS has to offer there. So guys, do it responsibly should you get involved, but let me know if you guys like this play on Senga, 5+ Ks on the Mets to win tonight. Let's hear it in the comments down below. And one final thing, shout out to all you guys that will be attending Wardy Day. You guys can check out the tickets still available in the description and the comments down below. It'll be pinned. We have right around 10 or so tickets left. Feel free to take part in that should you guys wish. You'll be hanging out with your guy Wardy there August 1st. Mets San Francisco Giants fireworks night the day after the deadline. Hope to see you guys there. But let's get into this, and let's first start with all the reporting that has dropped that many of you guys have seen already, but I'm going to enlighten plenty of you who certainly have not to this point. And let's actually start with the news beside me, which has nothing to do with Passan, but did just happen literally over the past hour at the time of me recording this video, and that is Rico Garcia, everybody. Remember Rico Garcia, who pitched over 4 scoreless innings for the Mets here before being DFA'd, which a lot of fans, including myself, didn't love. Then for him to get picked up by the Yankees in the Bronx, his batting practice for the Yankees as they get shelled by the Atlanta Braves, gets DFA'd again, and I kid you not, I tweeted 48 hours ago, David Stearns is frothing at the mouth to bring back Rico Garcia in this bullpen, and that's exactly what happened. The Mets brought him back today, everybody. He was nails in his limited sample size from the Mets. I like Garcia going back to the one the Mets signed him this past offseason. Obviously, a guy who has high upside, as good as just being nails in limited sample sizes before ultimately being cut at some point there in this bullpen. I'm not expecting Rico Garcia to stay here all that long, but in the meantime, if he is going to be here, we need him to be impactful, so hopefully he can certainly eat more innings and do it at a quality rate the way that he was before the Mets designated him for assignment. Mets fans, let me know your thoughts about Rico Garcia returning to this Mets bullpen in the comments down below. Because going on from Rico, everybody, let's get into where this reporting stems from regarding Mr. Jeff Passan of ESPN. And as you guys can see here, Passan came out with his own article that you guys can check out. I'll have it down below in the description for anyone that has interest that wants to go ahead and read it themselves. But I'm going to make something very clear here about Passan's rankings of these top 50 trade deadline candidates, and it's the following. Some context needs to be shared because while the Mets have been connected to numerous players, and we're going to get into all those players in just a hot second, let's talk about the varying degrees of percentage of these players being dealt. Just because the Mets are connected to a player, just because the Mets are pursuing a player via trade, does one, not guarantee that's going to happen, and two, it doesn't even guarantee that that team itself is going to trade away said player. And that is why Passan broke down in this article the percentage, if he had to assume, what the likelihood of these players being traded would be. But as we break down these players now, everybody, Without further ado, let's get into it because we got a lot to talk about in this one. Take a look at this laundry list of players the Mets are actively connected to, guys. Going from Steven Kwan, we got a lot to say about that. Luis Robert Jr., and I do have some positives to share on Robert versus maybe what you guys have thought, which is simply negative thought process behind Robert and his potential impact should the Mets acquire him. Emmanuel Clase, who we broke down greatly in our video earlier today, and we're going to do it again here because there is potential trade package potential for the Mets and the Cleveland Guardians as a suitor in particular. Taj Bradley of the Tampa Bay Rays, Edward Cabrera, who I would love for the Marlins, Duran there from the Twins, flame-throwing setup/closer man who I would love to pair with Edwin Diaz, Reed Detmers, who's been nails this year there for the Angels that we've seen, Griffin Jacks, who I have a lot of positives to say about continued, David Bednar, I've been beating that drum for a while, Luis Severino, we'll talk about Sevy and the Mets connections and why I wouldn't get your hopes up on that happening, and Cade Smith, who is one of the more sneaky slept-on relievers out of the American League, a guy who has multiple years of control, but it doesn't mean that the Mets can't find themselves actually landing said relievers, and let's expand as to why that is. And let's actually start here, everybody. Let's go to the top with this one, and let's begin here with Steven Kwan, because this is a very fascinating one to me. This is not a guy that we otherwise went out of our way to break down extensively previously on the platform, but Steven Kwan, as you guys can see from the stats down below, is having himself a pretty respectable season there for the Cleveland Guardians. And the Guardians are currently in a position where they're going to be more sellers than they are going to be buyers of this year's deadline. This comes after having a great 2024 season there and first year under Stephen Vogt as the skipper. But what would the Mets be getting in Kwan this time around? That is a great question. And as you guys can see, not only from the list there, but also as you guys are going to be seeing right now, we're going to pull up and show you some of what's going on with Mr. Kwan and the highlights here beside me. Steven Kwan does make sense right away for this Mets team. Why does Steven Kwan make sense for this team? He makes a lot of sense if the Mets want stability in that outfield. And when you look at the lack of continued process from guys like Tyrone Taylor, who has been so noodle with the bat to the point where there is a world where Tyrone Taylor I could actually see being DFA'd before the season ends if he continues what has been a horrendous past month and a half stretch of baseball. Buddy has an OPS going back over the past month plus, I believe not even 400. It's been horrendous. And Jeff McNeil, while McNeil's been great in that center field position, the Mets would like more stability there, and Steven Kwan provides that while giving you more upside. The only downside with Steven Kwan immediately is the fact that he does not have power. This is not a guy that you can expect to come in and be a 20, 25 home run hitter. No, Kwan is definitely more your prototypical 10 to 15 home run guy, but has a lot of gap-to-gap ability and will hit for high contact. Just the slugging may be Jekyll and Hyde in what you're getting. And this season for Steven Kwan, in 92 games and 404 plate appearances, has 43 runs scored, 6 home runs, 32 RBIs, 11 stolen bags, a 285, 345, 396 clip, good for a 2.1 WAR and 9% above league average as a batter. Now, as I said, those are certainly positive and not negative numbers on the Steven Kwan front. So what about Kwan is appealing? Well, one, you get a guy that can slap the baseball all over the place. You get a true gamer. When you think of a ball player, you think of Steven Kwan. Kwan is the type of guy that could really clutch up for the Mets and high leverage runner in scoring position situations when you don't necessarily need the big home run power. You just need to put the ball in play. And the Mets really don't have a lot of that, with the exception of McNeil, because Jeff has been more with that power swing. He's hitting more gap to gap, and that's been great for his production. But Kwan, who very well could be on the move, and I preface this by saying that Steven Kwan being traded is far from a guarantee. Kwan is currently at the percentage of being traded at 20% per Jeff Passan of ESPN. So pretty much what that means is, and this is as Jim Bowden of The Athletic has stated earlier today as well, that if Kwan is going to be dealt, it's going to be because of a deal that the Guardians kind of can't refuse, that they feel the need that they kind of have to trade Kwan because this is such a beneficial trade for them. And if you're the Mets here, knowing that Kwan has team control until 2028, would you be willing to give up the proper assets that would take to acquire Steven when, again, you're getting a guy who in 519 career games has 31 total home runs? This is not your power hitter. This is more of, again, your prototypical gap-to-gap, huge contact hitter. Again, that's why he's batting north of 300 at 285 to be exact, and right around a 345 on base. I mean, just for the qualities on offense and defense, and certainly the stolen base element alone, he's a very good multi-tool player, and I think he would do well for this Mets team, especially to bring more stability and consistency than what you're getting there in Tyrone Taylor. But would I personally be inclined to give up a king's ransom for Steven Kwan if that's the only way that you're going to be able to pry him away from the Guardians? No, I most certainly would not do that, at least if I'm David Stearns and this Mets club. But this is where things get more interesting. Steven Kwan, in my opinion, I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, is far more appealing for this New York Mets team if he is not the only man that the Mets are acquiring from the Cleveland Guardians. If you decide to lump Steven Kwan in a trade of more significance where it checks off more, say, two birds with one stone, if not more, then we're talking. Because then when we get into that further Steven Kwan discussion, and we're not just talking about the upside in Kwan, his offensive output between his base running, his defense, and obviously his bat-to-ball skills, we also have to talk about other guys that can find themselves in that mix. And one man that's been connected to the Mets as well, who I think makes a lot of sense if the Mets are going after guys with control, and newsflash, everybody, they are. The Mets love the idea of bringing in a high-leverage arm, especially that has more than 1 year of control, because they would be willing to give up the assets it would take, knowing that you could have stability in that bullpen beyond, say, the 2025 season for at least that one individual player. And outside of Steven Kwan, everybody, let's talk about Cade Smith. This is a fascinating one. Another guy that I really haven't talked about all that much this season up until now, present day. But Cade Smith certainly has plenty of qualities to be enticed as a Mets fan. And as you guys can see from the highlights already, Buddy is as nasty as ever. 44 games and 42 innings for the young 26-year-old right-hander. He has a 3.2 ERA, a 2.5 expected ERA, a 2 FIP, a 2.5 SI ERA, a 1.2 WHIP, 63 Ks, roughly 14 strikeouts per 9 to a 3.4 walks per 9. Love the K to walk ratio. It's right around a 10. That is right up my alley. Just look at these pitches, guys. Cade Smith is nothing short of nasty. And I love the idea of Cade Smith coming in to this Mets bullpen to pair along with Steven Kwan in a multi-piece trade, because Smith is not necessarily going to cost you the same as, say, Emmanuel Clase, that we'll get into in a second, because he's not as good as Clase, at least on paper, but at the same time, he's so nasty. He's so nasty. And the fact that Cade Smith is not a free agent until 2030, he's arbitration eligible starting 2027, tells you that if the Mets are going to make a trade happen here, a lot of pieces will probably need to be involved. You're landing a very controllable pitcher with a lot to give. He's just getting his major league career started. So if you're going to go ahead and do a haul with the Guardians for controllable talent and Kwan and Cade Smith, this is where more of the top prospect as well as your infield options, who the Mets are willing to trade at least one of, that's been reported. I'm going to expand on that reporting and a lot more that's dropped over this past day from The Athletic with a very special guest early tomorrow on the platform before game 2 of their 3-game set against the Halos. So make sure you guys are chiming the Mets content. We're pumping out a boatload, especially from now up until the deadline. You cannot miss a beat here, everybody. But Cade Smith has not missed a beat at all, with being pretty much nasty all season long. And him paired with Kwan would be great. Now you ask yourself, would you be willing as a Mets fan, or David Stearns rather, to give up the assets it's going to take for a package to get this done? And in my opinion, this is a kind of package that would move the needle significantly for the Mets, in the sense that you not only land a true stud arm for your bullpen who has ridiculous stuff, a lot of late movement especially, but Kwan, who would help provide stability to your offense, where, yes, I think we can all agree that Steven Kwan isn't necessarily the end-all be-all in dictating where this offense goes this year, but he makes them a better team today than they were the day prior by acquiring him. That is a simple reaction to that. So Cade Smith, like what he provides there, guys. I certainly do. And expand on Cade here just for a second. Let's pull up his savant numbers. That is Griffin Jackson. You guys see right there from our video that we actually dropped earlier today. He too is unbelievably nasty, and we'll go back to talking about Jax probably in a couple minutes here. But to expand more on Cade Smith, guys, this is what you're getting. A lot to love there. He's got the 4-seam that he throws 70% of the time, sitting 96, the splitty 20% of the time, sitting 88, and the sweeper 10% of the time, sitting right around 85. But as you guys can see there from his actual arsenal, a lot to like here for Mr. Cade Smith. He's not a ground ball pitcher, but that's okay. He's in the 98th percentile in extension, 6'5", 230-pound frame. I would hope so. 95th percentile in barrel percentage, 57th in hard hit percentage, 39th in walk percentage, 96th in K percentage, 96th in whip percentage, 69th in chase percentage, 95th in expected ERA, 92nd expected net batting average, 81st in fastball velo, and right around league average there and average exit velocity. So he hasn't been giving up terrible hard contact, obviously. He's been above league average, and the barrel percentage has been amongst the best in baseball. So he's not getting barreled hard at all right now. What does Cade Smith provide for this Mets bullpen? It provides some stability, it provides some nastiness, and it provides them a true setup option for Mr. Edwin Diaz. As with the Mets are on the hunt to land, and him and Kwan, I say bring them on down. Let me know, Mets fans, if you're for a trade, a package with the Guardians, a blockbuster, if you will, if that can happen with Kwan as well as one of these other guys. Now, would I be more than happy the Mets just acquire one of these pitchers without landing Kwan from the Guardians? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that Kwan is the end-all be-all that the Mets need to go ahead and land, especially when you have to kind of sway them decently in order to make that happen. But Cade Smith, everybody, is right around this same percentage of being traded as Kwan. So not impossible, but not necessarily guaranteed unless the Mets throw an offer that makes a lot of sense for both sides, especially the Guardians, because he's at 20% according to Mr. Jeff Passan of ESPN. But a man who's also at 20%, but feels like it's going to be increasing by the second for good reason, because this has been a hot commodity, a name that's been out there a lot as of late, guys. Let's go ahead and expand on the fact that if the Mets aren't going to bring in Kwan and Cade Smith, why not Kwan and Emmanuel Clase, right? Because Emmanuel Clase is a dog, right? When you think of guys that could impact this Mets bullpen right now for the better, there are a few that could be as dominant as Clase. And Clase is not a free agent still until the 2028 offseason or so, if I'm not mistaken. He has a 2027 club option. I think he has a 2028 club option as well. He has multiple years of control on that 5-year contract, right around $4 million AAV. Exactly right around what a guy, and Stephen Kwan is making, for example, because Kwan's making right around $4 million this year. Cade Smith isn't even making $800K base salary. He's still on that pre-arb deal, which is crazy. And that's why they're costly when that's the case. But Clase, as you guys can see here, we expanded on in our video earlier, but we'll certainly talk more about Clase given that Passan came out with the reporting on him. And when you think of guys that could be true setup options for Edwin Diaz, as well as potential options for this team for the better, where Edwin Diaz has uncertainty with his future. Not that I want to see Edwin Walker go anywhere, but knowing that Diaz is in a walk year, it makes further sense for David Stearns and the Mets to go ahead and acquire not only a dominant reliever, but a guy with multiple years of control. Say, God forbid, you do not bring back Edwin Diaz, or you still do bring back Edwin. You're going to want a guy as nasty as Edwin, if not better, to pair alongside him. And the Mets don't have anyone in the bullpen that checks off those boxes. However, Emmanuel Clase is as close as you're going to get, right? 44 games, 44 innings, 2.86 ERA, 2.84 expected ERA, just over a 2 FIP, a 3 SI ERA, just over a 1 WHIP, a 9 K per 9 to a 2 walks per 9. So he's not striking out guys at the rate that a Cade Smith or Griffin Jax is doing, but he's still unbelievably good. And Clase paired in this bullpen would do nothing short of great damage for the opposing teams. Like, especially after we saw, guys, I meant to mention it, I just didn't get a chance to until now, David Robertson signing on a prorated $16 million total contract, but he's making like $6 million right away, and then the rest will be spread out and however they're going about the pay structure. Robertson went back to the Phillies for the 3rd time in his career, when he had more success with the Phillies in 2022 after being traded there from the Cubs than what he did with the Mets in 2023 when he signed with us initially. I would have loved D-Rob back. Pains me to see him with the Phillies. I hope he becomes batting practice. Nothing personal, D-Rob, but I wish the absolute worst on him for the next half season at least. But having said that, knowing that Robertson is now off the table and the Mets certainly liked him as a high leverage option, all the more reason why they need to go out here and do something of significance, right? Because the other rival teams in the National League, in the Phillies, the Dodgers, the Padres, they are not going to sit on their hands to make moves. So David Stearns can't be this schmuck out here. I'm not saying he is, but he can't be one to be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and acquire the Paul Blackburns and the Jesse Winkers and the Phil Matons, as if those are the end-all be-all moves for this team again at the deadline, because the Mets are likely going to face the same unfortunate result and outcome come postseason play, if not sooner, because they did not properly allocate in all those areas. Clase, though, as dominant and as good as they get, bring this man to Queens. That is a guy that you give up a keen ransom for. And if you're going to add Kwan with them, if it's going to be a blockbuster, it might as well be for blockbuster-worthy players. And not only does Cade Smith fall in that category, but to a higher degree, Emmanuel Clase certainly does as well. But outside of Emmanuel Clase, everybody, there are plenty other players that make sense for this team that we know Mr. Jeff Passan linked to the New York Mets. And outside of Clase, everybody, let's get into another man. And I do apologize, the stats might be slightly skewed here, just in the sense of from last time I did the graphic. He's probably had at least 1 or 2 outings since then, since the All-Star break. But guys, David Bednar is another arm that I think would be brilliant for this Mets team. And I would actually make the argument that Bednar could be more realistic for the Mets to a certain degree than some others, and here's why. Because as appealing as David Bednar is for this club, one thing to make note of with him especially versus others is the fact that the Mets have actually had a bit of a connection with Bednar going back the past couple seasons, but especially this past year, where in 2024, Bednar kind of fell off a cliff from being that dominant reliever that Pirates fans expected to get. He had a very Jekyll and Hyde 2024 2024 season, but he's all the way back here in 2025, and these numbers show. And I know you might say to yourself, oh, you know, the stuff plus with some of these relievers fluctuates. It's true. Bednar's numbers are nasty, but he doesn't necessarily have as dominant stuff when looking at stuff plus as, say, you know, a top relief option and a Ryan Helsley, for example, for the St. Louis Cardinals. But that is like the creme de la creme. And guys, reliever-wise, you're going to go out and try to acquire, and they're going to cost a king's ransom. Bednar won't be cheap, but he should be cheaper than Helsley, and that does mean something when you're going to go ahead and acquire a reliever. Bednar's numbers, as you guys see there, four-seam fastball, sitting 97, throws right around 50% of the time. Curveball, 34%, sitting right around 78. The split at 92%, sitting right around 17%. 92 miles per hour is what I meant to say. Look at the Savant numbers. I'm not going to relay all of them because you all see them right there. He's been dominant. K percentage in the 95th percentile, especially wall above league average and walk percentage in the 74th percentile, extension 74th. There's a lot to like here in David Bednar, and he's had connections to Mets going back over the past year and a half. So the Mets are going to go ahead and make a trade with the Pirates that isn't named Mitch Keller. Because what I found so fascinating about Passan's reporting is that he did not have Keller connected to the Mets when out of Pittsburgh's camp from Noah Hiles, who's one of their main beat guys there for the Pittsburgh Gazette. It's interesting how he currently has the Mets as a front runner, you could argue, whereas Passan doesn't even have them linked. Something tells me that either Pittsburgh media is trying to boast out there that, you know, they have all this interest and that the Mets are a top suitor because it's a big market Mets, whereas the reality might be that the Mets aren't as involved in, say, Mitch Keller. And if they aren't, that's because they're probably going after more ace caliber guys than anything else. And while I like Keller, he isn't necessarily an ace caliber starter. Question is, how many ace caliber starters are available at this year's deadline? And the answer is really not all that many. But there are a lot of ace caliber relievers available. And Mr. David Bednar falls in that category as a high upside, high leverage arm for this Mets team to consider. So I'm telling you, Mets fans, is don't be shocked should it happen, because David Bednar does make plenty of sense for this Mets bullpen, and he's a guy that I think the Mets can get at a reasonable price versus some others that we're breaking down today. But outside of David Bednar, everybody, another man that we got to talk about and get into is one that has not necessarily been swinging the bat great this season, but he has been finding more of his swing as of late, and I think that in itself is important, everybody. And we have to have ourselves a discussion here. I'm going to pull it up for a second here. So we just talked about Emmanuel Clase. Let's go ahead and do the following now in Mr. Luis Robert. Now, I'm not even going to pull up the Robert stats right now from what he's done all this season because I'm going to relay them because my graphic was a little off by a couple games, and that's completely fine. But as you guys can see here, I'm going to switch that just for a second so I can pull up his highlights for each and every one of you, because while Robert doesn't have a lot of highlights to show from this season, he certainly has highlights when we go back over the past season. Actually, we actually have some midseason highlights this year. So let's go ahead and do exactly that regarding Mr. Luis Robert. And as you guys can see right here, what is there to like about Luis Robert? What you like about Luis Robert is that he's a clear change of scenery candidate. This is a man a couple years ago that north of 40 home runs, right? A lot to love, a true five-tool talent. And this season, Robert currently has 10 home runs, 25 stolen bases, north of 40 RBIs. He's finally batting above the Mendoza line at 201. He's right around the 300 on base. And slugging obviously has more work to do as well, which is why he's in the 75th percentile there in average batter, meaning he's still 25% below league average as a hitter. What is the difference with Robert? Well, let me tell you guys. Going back to the start of June, since June 6th, Luis Robert is currently hitting 256 with a 340 on base and a 465 slug. That's all in a horrendous White Sox lineup where he's never going to go anywhere and never has any motivation out of self-motivation to get up in the morning to go and play for the White Sox. Obviously, the millions of dollars helps, but still, let's be realistic. It's hard to be motivated when you're on a garbage club every single season the way that Robert has his entire career. But he's still going to be a hot commodity at this year's trade deadline. And Robert was just one of many players that obviously the Mets have been linked to varying degrees here. And hilarious as I say this, John Heyman, I kid you not, just tweeted this as we speak. Luis Robert is drawing interest. While he just got over 200, he hits lefties well and plays good defense. White Sox may have to pay down a bit. Change of scenery still needed for sure, because he has a $20 million player option for next year. Or, yeah, whatever option is, player or club regardless, whatever team acquires him is going to need to opt into that deal pretty much. And that isn't overly appealing for a guy that is not playing at a $20 million rate of average annual value. But Robert, as we expand on him a little bit more, everybody, very interesting to make note of when you look at all the players that have been connected to the Mets, Robert has been a constant, and he's currently at a 50+% rate of being traded by this year's deadline. That's increasing by the second with the way that he's obviously performing better. Now, I know you guys don't love Robert, but when you bear in mind that Jose Siri may never play a game for the Mets again this season, yes, that's how bad his setback was. There's no immediate timetable at all for Siri. If he returns, it will not be until probably towards the end of summer at this actual rate. Outside of Siri, what do you look at? Tyrone Taylor. Buddy has not been able to hit a beach ball to save his life the past month and a half. Then you look at Luis Robert. Robert has been hitting. He's been hitting on a bad team as of late. And unless you guys care so much about the overall numbers and not the recency bias over the past 2 months, which is a good sample size, then all I got to tell you is that Robert does make sense. He isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg. The Mets have all the assets and then some to make it happen for Robert. And I would make the argument that Robert is easily one of the most realistic bad options the Mets will acquire by this year's deadline. I think Robert is far more realistic than Stephen Kwan. I think Robert is a huge change of senior candidate that all it'll take to be landing in a deep lineup with the Mets in center field, playing for Flushing Queens in a postseason run to get him back to being more of that impactful batter that we know he can be. He's been hitting really well post All-Star break and that key victory. I think that series win for the White Sox over the Pirates in Pittsburgh, he was all over it in that series on playing good baseball. So hopefully we can see more Robert. Obviously, Robert has fluctuated big time with off-speed and breaking pitches this season, doing his best Tyrone Taylor impression, but he has far more upside than Taylor and has a lot to give, and he is appealing, especially on the buy low candidate, which he certainly is for this Mets club. So let me know your thoughts, the pros and the cons of Luis Robert in the comments down below, everybody, because we don't just stop there with Luis Robert. Like I said, there were an abundance of players the Mets have been connected to on that list, and the next player that I want to get into and highlight, at least here for a second, everybody, is not going to be Cade Smith. Is not going to be Emmanuel Clase. Is not going to be some of those other guys. Let's get into a couple of guys here that I'm excited to break down, especially when we talk a little bit more on what the Minnesota Twins have to offer. I'll be fairly brief because I literally just broke these guys down in our video that dropped earlier today, but Griffin Jax is a guy that's a nasty. Unbelievably nasty. This is a man I would love to see this Mets bullpen. Multiple years of control, making $2.35 million. Ignore the sub-4 ERA. It's the 2.99 expected ERA. It's the sub-2 FIP. It's the sub-2 SI ERA that you got to care about. What actually you can take into account what a pitcher can control. This is Griffin Jax. Over 14 strikeouts per nine with just over 2 walks per nine, and one of the best K to walk ratios you will find from any player this season, everybody. And Jax is casually just one of the better pitchers. His changeup, his sweeper are nasty. Some of the best in all the American League. So Jax is a guy that I think makes endless sense for this team. And we know the Mets have already barked up the tree of Danny Coulomb, a lefty option out of that Twins bullpen, among others. But Jax, and I'll be brief on this, guys, because I told you about him a lot earlier, he makes so much sense for this Mets bullpen. He isn't as flashy as an Emmanuel Clase or a young Duran that we're going to highlight in a second, but he is unbelievably good when looking at the nastiness. He has plenty to give. Look at that K to walk ratio, guys. Like, seriously, if you just care about the baseline ERA, you're not paying attention. So many more factors go into those things. He's under team control until 2028. If the Twins are going to be willing to trade Mr. Griffin Jax, do not be surprised if the Mets, at minimum, find themselves deep in talks there, if not something greater. Because the likelihood of Jax being traded is surprisingly almost at 50% now, according to Jeff Passan, which tells you that the Twins are gearing up to sell potentially big at this year's deadline with some controllable pieces. Jax falls in that category. So I definitely want to know how you guys feel about Griffin, because not only do you have Griffin Jackson to consider, but as I just mentioned there, let's talk briefly a bit more on Mr. Young Duran, because this is as good as it gets. When I think of relief options for this Mets team, there are very few that I think would do better than Mr. Young Duran. I'm obsessed with Duran. He's a flamethrower, buddy. Sits 100 on the gun. 100 on the gun, mind you. Him and Edwin Diaz. There would not be a better 1-2 punch out of the National League when looking at bullpens from setup to closer. That is what Duran is. And Duran's going to cost you a king's ransom because he's under team control until 2028. You would have to give up top talented prospects and or those fringe MLB players in the infield that we talked about previously. You'd have to at minimum consider that, if not more, for a guy like Duran. Because Duran is not just any reliever. He's a guy with over 10 strikeouts per nine to a 3.3 walks per nine, a 2.57 ERA, SI ERA, just over 2 FIP, a 1.86 or a 1.66 ERA, and a 2.38 expected ERA. Was there not to love about Duran? The only thing that there isn't to love about Duran is the fact that he's going to cost you a good amount of prospect capital or just assets in general if you're going to go ahead and trade for him. Then you add in the fact that obviously the Phillies, the Dodgers, the Padres, they're going to be in the market for Duran if they aren't already, because how can they not be, knowing that Duran can be such a weapon? I mean, adding Duran takes your bullpen from potentially good to great, depending on the status of it. And for the Mets, they just need to be good because they don't have consistency there right now with quality pitchers. Duran would help in that regard, and he's currently at also a 40+% rate to be traded. Not only are the Mets in the market for him as a best fit, but the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs, the Tigers, and the Rangers all fall in those categories as well. So yes, Duran's going to be a hot commodity for a lot of teams. Rest assured, though, the Mets will be involved. Let's just find out if they can find themselves winning that bidding war in the end. That would take for the flamethrower and right-hander. But Duran, very enticing as well. Some other guys I wanted to at least briefly get into here. Taj Bradley, the Mets are connected to, but I'm really not going to go out of my way to break down Taj too much right now for the following reason. If the Mets are going to be landing a starter, it does not appear that's going to be a Taj Bradley type. And without spoiling too much, I'm going to leave it at that because we have a greater discussion tomorrow with a very special guest who's going to elaborate and explain why exactly that is. If the Mets land starters, they're going to be very specific starters. And I don't necessarily know if Taj Bradley checks off enough boxes for what the Mets would be looking for there. A lot of upside, very young, exciting for sure, but I think the Mets want to work more there, and I'll expand as to why. And to a degree, the same can apply with Edward Cabrera, which is why I'm not going to go and rehash as to why Edward Cabrera is awesome, because I do like Edward Cabrera a lot, but I will have to see it to believe it if the Mets are going to be further in that market than what they are right now. The Mets are just one of like half a dozen teams that are currently connected to Cabrera, but it has a trade percentage rate right now of 30%. David Bednar is at 60%, in case I didn't mention that earlier, guys. Then, of course, you look at Cedric Mullins. I don't really think I need to expand much more on in the case of Mullins because we've talked about Mullins a lot already on the platform, but as you guys can see here, these numbers are slightly skewed. This does not include his first series post All-Star break, so I would like to make that in mind, but still relatively the same numbers that you'd be getting from Mullins. Mullins makes most sense in my opinion, especially if you're going to put him in a spot where, okay, he's kind of your Jesse Winker replacement, right? Your lefty bat, platoon DH, center field, obviously a much greater defender. I shouldn't say greater defender than Tyrone Taylor. That's not true. But a guy that has more balance in his offense to defensive game than Taylor. And he's not going to cost you too much, Mullins. And that's why I do think he's actually very feasible. Him and Robert, I think, make a lot of sense as to why we could see those things happening. But until then, everybody, Mullins is still one of the many outfield options that the Mets have been linked to, really going over the past month and a half, 2 months now, everybody. Now, you know how I mentioned Ryan Helsley? We're going to talk about Ryan Helsley because Ryan Helsley's trade percentage is at 60% right now. I know I said a little bit earlier in the show how, he is like the cream of the creme. He is. I will be surprised if the Mets land Helsley, mainly because it shows that they're going to give up everything that it takes for a high-quality reliever. But if you're going to go ahead and do that, Helsley is an exception to certainly do that, guys. Let me show you not only how nasty Helsley looks, but let me relay his numbers for each and every one of you because he is really, really good. And he's having himself another dominant season as one of the best reliever options in all of the National League and all Major League Baseball, for that matter. He has just been so good so far this year for the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Cardinals are obviously more in a position to sell than buy this year. So bearing that in mind, let's get into Ryan Helsley and what is most appealing about the young right-hander, because Helsley is a guy that when we look at last season, Buddy just took the league by storm. I mean, what I think of relievers that can be dominant, especially not only with the fastball, but his breaking stuff. Helsley, we all saw with our very eyes how nasty he can be against this Mets team in particular. That's why the Mets haven't fared all that well against Helsley, depending on the certain outing that they found themselves in. But the 31-year-old, just for context, he's got that slider, four-seam, and the cutter, the three-pitch mix for sure. And his contract status has him a free agent at the end of this year. So that alone is why I would actually be surprised if the Mets land Helsley and win these sweepstakes, mainly because if they're going to go ahead and give up big assets for relievers, they want to do it for guys of control, not guys that are rentals like Helsley. But we'll see what David Stearns does, because in 34 innings, Helsley has just under 10K per nine to just under 4 walks per nine, a 3.18 ERA and a 3.64 expected ERA, but he's in the top percentile and stuff. Plus, there are few relievers that are nastier in baseball currently than Ryan Helsley. But as I just mentioned and relayed to each and every one of you, regardless of how dominant he has been this season overall, he's a guy that's going to cost you obviously an arm and a leg when he's a rental reliever. If you're the Mets, wouldn't you much rather give up those similar assets if you can land a guy of control in Griffin and Cade Smith and Emmanuel Clase and Duran, just to name a few? I would take any of those four before considering Helsley if it's going to be similar value and what you'd have to give up to land said reliever. I don't think I'm wrong for saying that. You guys let me know how you feel in regards to the Mets and their pursuit of these relievers, because Helsley's nasty for sure, but I don't want to give up an arm and a leg and then some for a rental if they could do that same type of deal for something of more team control. I think that's the route the Mets will likely go down here from everything that's been widely reported to this point. But outside of Helsley, everybody, let's get into some other players briefly that the Mets have been connected to through this Passan article. And one player that I do definitely want to highlight, at least for a couple minutes, because we went through Kwan, Robert, Clase, Bradley, Cabrera, Duran, Detmers. I mean, we didn't really talk a whole lot about Reed, but he's obviously another very enticing option for this Mets bullpen for sure. Reed Detmers makes a lot of sense as a lefty option, especially. He's dominant, and that's what he would be for this Mets team. So if the Angels are going to be selling, and you know what? We'll probably talk more about Detmers. I think we'll actually have more of an individual segment on Detmers at some point over the next couple days as the Mets are facing Detmers in that 3-game set there against the Angels. So I think that's a perfect time to talk more on Reed. But let me leave you with this, everybody. Let's expand at least briefly in regards to Luis Severino, because Luis Severino, guys, wants to come back to the Mets. Like, he really wants to come back to the Mets. But the problem is, Severino's on an ugly contract. That's why the Mets didn't bring him back. You know, when we saw him making over $60 million with the Angels, we're like, not Angels, the A's, we're like, have fun. He's not having fun, though. Severino's one of the worst pitchers in baseball at home this year. But it has nothing to do with him necessarily performing at home as it is where his home is. Because in Sacramento, Severino hates playing there. He hates every aspect of it. He hates that's a minor league ballpark. He can't get past it. And I broke down in an individual video on my WardyNYM YouTube channel that you guys can check out whenever you want for MLB-wide topics, just over this past couple weeks here, how Severino hates the same team that gave him the largest contract in franchise history. He already wants out. And I can tell you in confidence, going back to just a couple weeks ago when I was talking to people and they know who they are there in the industry, I was relayed significantly people who are like this with Severino, that Sevy not only firmly expects to be traded, but he desperately wants to come back to the Mets. Makes sense. Severino had plenty of success with the Mets last season, and he's pretty much a New York native as a guy who's been in New York his whole career from the Yankees to the Mets. I don't blame the guy for wanting to return. The problem, though, he only has a 6.39 K per nine to a 3 walks per nine. His ERA's over 5 this year. The expected numbers aren't great. On the road, he's far more proficient. He's right around a 3 or so, maybe just over a 3 ERA on the road this season, whereas at home, he's been batting practice. So what does that tell you? Change of scenery, back in Flushing, Queens. We could expect Severino to thrive, but the reason why I wouldn't get my hopes up on that happening right now is knowing his contract and knowing the Mets don't want to eat that thing. The A's would actually have to eat a portion of that contract. And are the A's going to go out of their way to do such a thing? I'm not overly sure if they're going to do exactly that. And if the Mets are going to be adding starting pitching, I don't think Severino moves the needle enough for them unless they really get the guy by eating a portion of his contract and pretty much getting him for slimming it up. Basically like what the Mets got for Chris Bassett when they traded Adam Oller and JT Ginn. You're probably saying to yourself, who? Exactly. JT Ginn is far more concerned having affairs happen and breaking up relationships. For those that don't know, that's a slippery slope you can check out on socials. That's happened over the past year and a half. Yeah. Imagine waking up one day and you're finding out that you're being blown up on social media because someone you're having a fling with's husband found out about it, i.e. Mr. TJ Ginn. But in the case there of Adam Oller didn't really amount to anything either, as he was a late blooming prospect, was actually a Rule 5 draft pickup by the Mets, was huge with them in the 2021 regular season in the minor leagues, and then he was a part of that deal for Chris Bassett entering the 2022 season. Point is, if you can land Severino for little to nothing, you go out and do it. If you have to give up anything of significance, you don't even bother, because there's really no reason to. So, folks, that is going to do it for our Jeff Passan breakdown. We talked about all these players to varying degrees, and like I said, we'll expand more on Reed Detmers and future content in the near future on the platform, guys. But out of all players that we broke down in varying lengths of depth there and percentage-wise and these guys being traded, I definitely want to hear from you guys in the chat down below. Who do you most want to see land in Queens out of the players that we currently discuss? Which ones do you think are most likely versus least likely that I broke down? And Severino currently has a 25% possibility of being traded. We'll see if that increases or decreases in the coming days. Thank you guys again all so much for watching. I'll see you all for Mets post-game coverage later on tonight at the time of this video dropping. And let's go Mets, baby. Peace out, folks.